One genre that's always really stuck with me is platformers. These were some of my favorite games growing up, and even though I'm older now, they're still just as fun to play. If anything, I'd say that it's my comfort genre. I can always sit back and just enjoy them, in part because of how timeless they are. I mean, you can go back and play a lot of the platformers that were made in the 90s, and they still hold up incredibly well today thanks to their art styles and just simple, fun mechanics. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go back down memory lane and take a look at 25 of my favorite platformers of all time. Now, do keep in mind here that this is not meant to be an objective, definitive list. It's really just my own personal favorite platformers, and hopefully you find something that will interest you, and you can go and check it out yourself if you like something that you see. As a bit of a prerequisite though, I'm not going to include Metroidvanias on this list. I will make a separate video for Metroidvania sometime in the future. Go and make sure to subscribe if you want to watch that as well. But for today, we're going to primarily focus on platforming. So with that said and out of the way, maybe go ahead and get a snack and drink, sit back, and let's go and get right into it. So to start off this list, and this is actually a bonus because I actually made a mistake while making this video. I included 26 games instead because apparently I can't count. But to start the list off, I have a game that a lot of you probably haven't heard about, being Voodoo Vince. This is probably one of the more obscure games on this list. It's an old original Xbox exclusive that a lot of people really haven't played. Now, they did remaster it for modern platforms, but it's a game that's always really stuck out to me. It's got a darker tone to it than a lot of other games within this genre because you play as this voodoo doll that's trying to rescue his master. So being a voodoo doll, you can actually hurt yourself and it'll actually wipe out all the other enemies on screen. It's kind of goofy by nature, but overall, it's got an enjoyable story, albeit it is weird, but it's a good, solid collectathon platformer, and that's why it makes my number 25 spot. Number 25, Jak and Daxter. Before Naughty Dog made ultra-realistic games meant to kind of actually depress you, well, they used to make colorful platformers, including the Jak and Daxter trilogy. Now, I will say the first game is a lot different than its sequels. That first game is more of your traditional collectathon platformer where you have a silent protagonist, and it's kind of goofy with its buddy duo, but then Jak 2 completely changes everything. They really opened up its universe with a more futuristic sci-fi setting. You go to the city, you can actually fly around in these space cars. It's definitely a big change. I mean, even Jak can now talk, and it's much darker than that original. Some people enjoy that change, other people don't, but what I'll say here is that I really think that both formats are a lot of fun. I do think Jak 2 is a little bit more unique, and that might make it stand out, but there's something special about that first game as well. Even still, there is a reason that some people like the first game much more, or vice versa, but I do think that all of them are good, and I can easily recommend them. Number 24, Kirby. Now, as a kid, I loved the Kirby series, especially Kirby 64, The Crystal Shards. I'd really say that this is a great series for kids because it's a very forgiving platformer with how Kirby can float around, but what really separates it from other games is Kirby's ability to absorb different powers. In some games, he can even combine two different powers, and I just loved that when I was a kid. I always got so excited to see what two abilities combined into what, and because the levels are so well designed, each ability has their own pros and cons given each individual situation. Now, I will say as I've gotten older, Kirby hasn't really connected with me in the same way just because they are very easy, but there are two other entries that really stands out to me even now. One is Kirby Robobot for the 3DS, and that one just completely changes how Kirby plays. You are more of a robot in that game, and it makes for a fresh take for the Kirby franchise. And then speaking of fresh, I mean, of course, I have to talk about the more recent Kirby in the Forgotten Land. This is the first 3D Kirby game, and it works incredibly well. We actually need more 3D Kirby games in the future because I think that Forgotten Land really opens up a lot of possibilities for this series. Number 23, Oddworld New and Tasty. As the name implies, these are very odd games, and they're actually quite unique for what they are. In a lot of platformers, you play as characters who are precise with their jumping prowess, but in Oddworld, it's completely different because you play as this clumsy alien-like character that is instead escaping from a corporate company that's been taking advantage of his race. They've been turning them into food and drinks. Yes, this is a very dark series, and after Abe discovers this terrible secret, he sets out to escape and to save as many of his race as he possibly can. Now, he's not your typical hero, though. You're not going to run around like you're Batman or something. So rather than running through levels as fast as you possibly can, it's much more thought-provoking with stealth-based elements. I think that's actually what really makes this game special, though. You try to save the other inhabitants from their bleak fate by navigating various threats, because there's a lot of them, and to guide Abe's race to safety with as little harm as possible. Now, it can be challenging at times, but I think it's very rewarding, and it has a good story to tell as well. This genre might not be known for good stories, but I think the Oddworld series is one exception to that rule. Number 22, Celeste. Now, this is actually yet another platformer that has a really good story to tell. It's about anxiety and depression, which is something that you wouldn't expect to see from this genre. I mean, this genre is usually light, colorful, and playful, but there's a very wholesome and deep story to tell in Celeste, and for that reason alone, Celeste already stands out. That's the thing, though, because it's so much more than just that. As a pure platformer, Celeste is absolutely among the very best. And I could easily rank this one much higher and feel perfectly fine with that because that's how great the gameplay is. It only has a few simple mechanics. You jump, you dash, and you climb, but the way that they use each mechanic in tandem and how they introduce fresh new ideas throughout the game, it is a masterclass of game design. It can also be very challenging, which for me, that's a huge bonus, especially if you want to collect everything. I like when games aren't afraid to offer a challenge and to test my skills, and I think Celeste offers just the right amount of challenge. Number 21, Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair. Now, this series was originally created as a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie, made by the original Rare creators. This seemed like a perfect match in heaven. This is a series we've all wanted to return for such a long time, and there was a ton of hype when it first launched on Kickstarter. And even though the first game didn't reach those lofty expectations, I still enjoyed it personally. Sure, there are some flaws with its oversized maps, but they absolutely nailed its sequel. This time in the form of a 2D platformer, though, that more mimics the Donkey Kong Country series, which was also created by Rare and some of the people on this team. It's got some really creative levels, and something that they did in this game, and I just think that this is absolutely brilliant, is that they brought its overworld to life. In a lot of these 2D platformers, you simply go to the overworld and you choose a level, and that's it. But in Impossible Lair, it's actually one big interconnected puzzle adventure, and it just offers a whole new layer to a game like this. I also have to say that this is another game that can be very challenging at times if you want to 100% it, as the name implies. The Impossible Lair is actually a level in this game, and technically you can beat it right out of the gate, but it's an incredibly long and very difficult level, so in order to make it easier, you do need to beat the other levels in the game first. Number 20, SpongeBob. Now, this one might surprise some of you. You might not expect much from a SpongeBob game, but I am telling you, Battle for Bikini Bottom and even the newest entry, Cosmic Shake, are really good collectathon 3D platformers. Now, I will say that Battle for Bikini Bottom is probably the better of the two, just because I do like the different character archetypes that it has to offer. You can play as SpongeBob, you can play as Patrick, or even Sandy, all of which have their own unique abilities, and the levels are just perfect if you have a history with this series. I mean, if you grew up watching the show, you're going to recognize all of its locations brought to life, and of course, the sense of humor is classic SpongeBob. I mean, if anything, I'm actually a little surprised at how well these games are written. It fits right in with the rest of the series and how hilarious they can be. Now, unfortunately, though, the first game doesn't have all the original voice actors, but even still, if you are a SpongeBob fan, you're probably gonna love these games as much as I did. Number 19, Mirror's Edge. Now, this is probably the most unique game on this list, if not the most unique game for this genre in its totality. This is an EA platformer where you play as a parkour runner. You run across a multitude of buildings, you can climb walls, you can slide under vents, and there's just a ton of mechanics that completely sets Mirror's Edge apart from pretty much every other game within this genre. Then on top of that, there's also enemies in this game that shoots at you. So there is combat. You can actually disarm enemies as you're running around and you can fight back. So on top of all of the obstacles, you have to navigate those live threats as well. And because the movement is so fast, so fluid, and so precise, it is just a rush to play through. I mean, there's not a game out there that's taken these mechanics and done it better. Mirror's Edge is completely its own thing, and because of its attractive art style, it's also aged incredibly well. This is an old Xbox 360 era game, and you know, a lot of games during that era hasn't aged well, but in Mirror's Edge, you can still play it today, and it still 100% looks and feels amazing to play. I just kind of wish that EA would bring the series back because, I mean, I think that there's still so much potential here if done right. Number 18, BattleBlock Theater. From the creators of Castle Crashers, they took that sense of humor and they brought it over to this hilarious 2D platformer. I adore the story in this game voiced by Tim Stamper. He really brings its cutscenes to life with just over-the-top dialogue. The story of Hattie Haddington will probably stick with me forever, but more importantly, it's also a great 2D platformer with some original ideas. Each block in this game has their own unique property, so one might make you bounce while another might burn you. Then you also have special abilities that you can collect throughout the game, and you can use them to help you along the way. And something about BattleBlock Theater is that I think it's actually one of the better cooperative games on this list. It kind of has that chaotic fun to it that Nintendo is so often known for. So, you know, if you have somebody to play with, I really cannot recommend BattleBlock Theater enough. Even in its competitive modes, if you have the right person to play with, they are a blast to play through. Number 17, Sonic Origins and Sonic Mania. Of course, we need to talk about some of the most recognizable games of all time, the 2D Sonic series. When Sega first introduced Sonic as Mario's competitor, this made for one of the most interesting rivalries of all time. It will go down in history. Sonic was the new cool kid on the block with its blazingly fast speed, and even all of these years later, I don't really think that there's a game that has taken that concept and done it better. I mean, if you want to go fast, there's only one Sonic. And Sega has made this series very accessible as well. You can get Sonic Origins on modern platforms today, which has a large number of the old games, including the original trilogy, which is still among the best games in the series alongside Sonic Mania. Sonic Mania is a throwback to that original trilogy, and you know, you can actually even argue that it's the best in the series. Either which way, though, I mean, you really can't go wrong with any of these four. They're still unique, they're super fast, and yeah, they're just a blast to play. Number 16, the Sly Cooper Trilogy. Now, this here is another series that takes your typical 3D platformer and it flips it on its end with a completely new idea. I mean, Sly Cooper has all the things that you would come to expect for this genre. It's got charming mascot characters, it's got collectathon elements, and a variety of worlds to explore. But where it's different is that it's also a stealth-based game. Now, it's not an overly difficult stealth-based game. I'd say this is really more of an introduction to that genre, if anything else. It is still more geared towards kids, but it opens up their imagination with these heist-like events. You seek down the bad guys, you gather intel, you pick their pockets, you steal their treasure, and you make for an escape. One thing about these games, though, is that they're not afraid to mix things up. There's a ton of mini games to play throughout this series. Now, some are good, some are not, but it constantly keeps each game fresh. And even the characters, you know, you don't just play as Sly Cooper. He's more of the acrobatic thief, but you also have missions where you play Murphy the Hippo, who excels with his power, and then you have Bentley the Turtle. He's the brains of the operation. They all play completely different from one another, and they play their own unique role in different missions. So the gameplay is constantly changing, and for the most part, I'd say that it's mostly a lot of fun. Number 15, Ratchet & Clank A Crack in Time. Now, Ratchet & Clank is a pretty long-running series. There's a lot of games in this franchise, and I could talk about a number of different mainline entries because they're all among the best action platformers ever made. But A Crack in Time is the one, to me, that stands out the most. In my opinion, this is Ratchet & Clank's magnum opus, and it just takes the series to a whole new level. It is a brilliant game from beginning to end. Of course, it has all of the crazy weapons that you would expect from the Ratchet & Clank series. In these games, it's not really about just defeating your enemies. No, that's not the goal here, but rather it's about how you defeat them in the most fun way possible. They just have some really unique, powerful weapons to play around with. But in Crack in Time, I thought it had an excellent story. I thought it had amazing level design with its spherical worlds. And then on top of that, it also has these sections where you play just as Clank. And here you have these time manipulation puzzles. They're not overly difficult, but they were thought-provoking enough to really stand out. It just adds an extra layer, and when you combine that with the rest of the game, again, the charming characters, its great story, it makes for one of the most memorable platformers that I've ever played. Number 14, Little Big Planet. I still remember when they first revealed this game on stage, and everybody was just whisked away by how charming it was. Sackboy is so adorably emotive and also highly customizable. I mean, you can completely make him your own by customizing him, and you're just constantly unlocking cosmetics, so you can always change that up. But it's not just Sackboy. It's really its entire world and the narration as well. It's all just so endearing. It also brought something completely new to the table as well. They introduced the play, create, share genre. Yes, it has this amazing single-player campaign that you absolutely need to play, but if you want, you can also create your own levels, and his level editor is extremely impressive. And over time, they improved on that aspect even more with the sequels. Now, speaking of that, though, Little Big Planet 2 is probably my favorite within the series, with Little Big Planet Vita being a close second. Really, though, I'd recommend the entire mainline series, including the newest 3D entry, Sackboy: A Big Adventure. I don't really think it's quite as good as the 2D games, but it's still a new take for the series, and it does work very well. Number 13, Super Meat Boy. I mean, if there was ever a Souls-like game for the platforming genre, then I think Super Meat Boy might be that game, just because of how brutally challenging it can be. This is the game that's really going to test your platforming skills, but they do it in such a brilliant way. Each level is bite-sized, and even though you're probably going to die countless times and then countless more times the later you get into the game, well, you automatically respawn. For that matter, when you eventually complete a level, it'll actually replay all of your deaths in one single sitting. It's really cool to watch, and it kind of sounds weird to say this, but somehow I feel like it kind of makes your mistakes enjoyable to a degree, and I think for that reason, Super Meat Boy is probably one of the most rewarding games that I've ever played. I still remember when this game first launched for Xbox Live Arcade. It was one of the best independent games ever made at that point, and even after all of these years later, I'd still say that it is among the best independent games ever made, and it's also just one of the best platformers ever made as well. Number 12, Donkey Kong Country. Okay, so I have a very specific connection with the original Donkey Kong Country trilogy because it's among the first games that I remember playing vividly. I mean, the new ones made by Retro, they're still really good as well. You could easily put those in this list too. But for me, the original trilogy made by Rare is something truly special. I can still remember booting it up and having that logo on screen and the sound effect that comes along with it. I remember aquatic ambiance and just some of the best music that's ever been in any video game. I remember all of the animal buddies that help you out, the swordfish, the parrot, the rhino, and the list just goes on and on. It just completely changes how you play the game, and I remember stages like the roller coaster carnival, crystal caverns, the ship that you climb with a snake, or even the beehive honeycombs. There's just so many memorable things about that original trilogy, and it's why it's always, to this day, stood out to me. It just has some of the best levels ever created, it has some of the best music, and the visuals to this day are absolutely stunning. I think these might be some of the best looking games for that generation, and that's a true testament to the art style because it still looks exceptional to this day. Number 11, Sonic Adventure 2. Now, speaking of games that I have a connection with, I have to talk about Sonic, specifically Sonic Adventure 2. I mean, I understand that there's probably other Sonic games that's probably aged a little bit better, and the 2D series is probably more consistent in terms of quality, but Sonic Adventure 2, for me, is the one that stands out the most. I still remember going to Toys R Us on my birthday, and I saw this weird console that I'd never really heard about, the Sega Dreamcast, with Sonic Adventure 2. I didn't really know what it was at the time. I'd never really heard about it, but it looked interesting, and it was on sale. So I picked it up, and the rest is history. When I played that game, it opened my eyes to how good Sonic can truly be. You could play as Sonic, you could play as Knuckles, there was Tails, Shadow, Dr. Eggman, and even Rouge the Bat. Their different playstyles really opened the door for all kinds of different gameplay, and then even the Chao Garden. To this day, I don't really know why I liked the Chao Garden, but there was something oddly interesting about raising those little things, and I spent far too much time playing it. So the entire Sonic Adventure package for me is just one of the most memorable platformers, though I will say, there's a number of 3D Sonic games that I really enjoy, including Sonic Heroes, Sonic Generations, and also the latest entry, Sonic Frontiers. Frontiers is a different take for the Sonic series, being more similar to how an open world works, but it surprisingly works very well, and it's even gotten better over time with its DLC. So I think for the first time in a while, the future for the 3D Sonic games is highly promising. Now here we are in the top 10, and I'm going to have to go with Spyro Reignited. When I was a kid, I was really interested in dragons, as a lot of boys were at that time. So out of all of the platforming mascots, and I mean, there were a lot during that time, but Spyro was the coolest. I mean, you play as this dragon who can glide around and breathe fire. How cool of an idea is that? And it works really good as a collectathon platformer. If I had to describe the Spyro games in just one word, that would be magical, especially in Reignited, where they brought the entire trilogy to life with completely remade worlds. Each level takes you to a new fantasy setting, and they're just beautiful in motion. I'd say that these, from a visual standpoint, are some of the best looking platformers that you can play, just period. And the way that they combine all of its other elements with that fantasy setting, I think is perfect. The calm, mesmerizing music, and even the gems that you collect, they have this nice sound effect to them that plays into its overall theme. It just all works in tandem, and when you combine that with its fun characters, even the jerks like Moneybags, it's just a fun series to play. Number 9, It Takes Two. Okay, so It Takes Two is a very unique game because it is a mandatory cooperative game. However, you can easily play it online because they give you a free friend pass. That way you can invite anybody to play with you, even if they don't own the game themselves. And the way it plays is that you're always in split screen. That might sound strange, but it's actually very important for this game because it makes teamwork a lot easier. And that's what this game is all about. It takes two. You need to work together to solve the various problems that they throw your way. And I'm telling you right now, this is one of the most creative games that I have ever played, hands down. On the surface, yes, it is a 3D platformer, but they introduce so many more ideas than just that. In one level, you might need to help each other fly a plane, whereas in the next, you might need to steer a boat while the other shoots at incoming obstacles. It's just constantly changing, and both my friend and me were just in awe as to how many ideas that they have for this game, and for the most part, they all hit home. So not only is this a great platformer, but it's also one of the most amazing cooperative experiences that you can play. Number 8, I'm going to have to go with the grandfather of all platformers, the Mario Brothers series. I mean, I could go on and on and on about the old NES games, New Super Mario Brothers for the Wii, or even Mario Wonder. They're all amazing in their own right, though I will say the one that I connect with the most is Mario Brothers 3. That's how I was first introduced to the Mario series, and it was actually just one of the first games that I played as a kid. And it's so crazy to think about how that series catapulted gaming into this whole new light. It has since inspired several generations worth of games, and that's kind of the thing, because all of these years later, they're still some of the best introductions to gaming. It doesn't really matter what your skill level is or what age you are. The Mario Brothers series, new and old, is just simply fun to play, for everybody. They're imaginative and they're perfectly designed with every little detail thought of. I'll always remember how Nintendo talked about how that first level in Mario Brothers is actually a tutorial in disguise. It's all laid out perfectly for players to discover power-ups, and I think that says a lot about Nintendo's skill level and how they craft their games. They think of absolutely everything, and that's why Mario time and time again has proven to be a masterclass in gaming as a whole. Number 7, Rayman Origins and Rayman Legends. It is an absolute shame that this series hasn't spawned a new game in over a decade. I mean, what do you do in Ubisoft? Because out of all of the 2D platformers, these are the two that I go back to the most and just think, this fits me perfectly for what I look for when it comes to this genre. It's got a gorgeous handcrafted art style, it's got super creative levels, it's got collectathon elements, they do some neat things with the music, especially in Legends, and they're also challenging. The Mario Brothers series might be the best introduction for gaming, and Super Meat Boy might be the Dark Souls of platforming, but Rayman, it's kind of the best of both worlds. It's just challenging enough to be rewarding for experienced players, and is charming enough for that younger audience as well. I mean, the first time I heard the Black Betty song played in Rayman, I knew right away. This is a special game, and it easily sits among my favorite platformers ever made. Number 6, and this one could actually potentially move even higher on my list sometime soon because there is a new entry coming, Astrobot. That game looks amazing, but that's the thing, because the first 2 entries are already some of the most amazing, charming platformers that I've ever played. Astrobot Rescue Mission is the only VR game on this list, and I wasn't exactly sure what to expect when I first played it, but it really just plays like a traditional 3D collectathon platformer, but because of virtual reality, it does kind of escalate its atmosphere. And I mean, the design for Astrobot is just so charming, and you can just tell how much love and care was poured into its world, and that only increases in Astro's Playroom. Again, though, Astro's Playroom is different because it's the only free game on this list because it actually comes included with every PlayStation 5. So it's not necessarily the biggest game on this list. You can beat it in just 3 to 4 hours. But what I'll say is that you can see and feel just how much heart was poured into this game. In Astro's Playroom, it's really about the history of PlayStation, and it just kind of feels like you're going down memory lane. You see a ton of character cosplays that you'll recognize, and you travel through the PlayStation 5 itself. I mean, that's just such a cool idea. And the GPU level, that has one of the catchiest songs ever, and it is just such a great experience that also takes advantage of the PlayStation 5 controller in unique ways. I still don't think that there's a game that's done it better. And in fact, I think Astro's Playroom is a great introduction for young kids as well. Some of the things that they do with the controller, it just feels really good in the hands. And when you combine that with just how charming this game is and how adorable Astrobot is, I mean, I can tell you firsthand, when my daughter played, she was absolutely thrilled, and that's why Astrobot makes it to my number 6 spot, and still could actually move up higher, again, with that new entry. All right, so here we are in the top 5, and I think a lot of people will have this one a little bit higher, but I'm going to go ahead and go with the Mario 3D games. I mean, it's kind of hard to pick just an absolute favorite from this franchise because, I mean, they're all so good, whether that be Mario 64, Mario Sunshine, Mario Galaxy, Mario Odyssey, and the list just kind of goes on and on. It really is a series where each game is so good that they could all be listed as the best platformer of all time. That's how consistent Nintendo has been with this series. But if I had to pick a favorite, I mean, this is tough. It really is. But I'd have to go with probably Mario Odyssey or maybe Mario Galaxy. I think Galaxy is probably consistently better just because I think Odyssey has too many collectibles at times for its own good. I mean, it has 880 moons to collect. And while that makes you feel like you're constantly discovering something, you know, it also might just be a little bit too much. Whereas the rarity that Galaxy offers might make it feel a little bit more rewarding. Either way, though, I mean, both of these games are super creative, and there's no doubt that these are some of the best platformers ever made, and that's why they made it in the top 5. Number 4, and by this point you're probably wondering what could possibly be higher than Mario, and I'm going to start off with Conker. And okay, admittedly, there are some other games in this list that mechanically offers better platforming, and that's also one of the reasons that I don't have it higher on this list. But I can also say that there are very few games out there that are as memorable as Conker. Conker is a collectathon adventure where he gets himself into the craziest situations that you're ever going to see in gaming. I mean, he helps pollinate a flower, for crying out loud, and you fight a poop monster. I mean, it's just bizarre, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of what you're going to see in this game. If there's ever a game that personifies don't judge a book by its cover, it would probably be this game. I can only imagine how many parents bought their kid this game for the Nintendo 64 thinking that it was a family-friendly game. Yeah, it's definitely not. You know, you don't play as a cute, cuddly squirrel. No, this is very much a mature-rated game, but it makes for this hilarious, unforgettable story that we haven't really seen replicated in gaming ever since, and I'm not really sure if we'll ever see something like it again. Now, the only thing is, which version do you play? There's the original uncensored Nintendo 64 version, and then there's also the Xbox remake, Conker Live and Reloaded. Now, I do prefer Live and Reloaded because I like its art style and its improved gameplay, but it does censor a lot of the language. That was a big controversy back when they remade it, and fans were not happy about that decision. So I completely understand why a lot of people might prefer that Nintendo 64 version. I just kind of wish that there was a combination of both games put together, but either which way, I think both versions are great. You can't go wrong with either which one. Number 3, Crash Bandicoot 1 through 4. Now, a lot of games in this list play similar to one another, but in Crash 1 through 4, they are completely their own thing. Yes, they are 3D platformers, but they don't have big open levels to explore. Rather, they limit you to a more linear experience that sole purpose is to challenge you. And let me tell you, these games are deceptively difficult. Now, okay, to be fair, the bridge level is probably borderline unfair, and a lot of people probably threw a fit and gave up right there. But outside of that level, I think that the level design is mostly brilliant. I love its unique take on 3D platformers, and I really enjoy that challenge. I mean, there's a lot of great 3D platformers in this list that I absolutely love, but there's not a single one that asks more from the player. They ask you to put your skills to the test, and even if you want more of a challenge, Crash also offers bonus rewards by completing a level in a certain time limit or by collecting all of its boxes.
There's actually a ton of content in the Crash N. Sane trilogy, and then also in Crash Bandicoot 4 as well.
I know 4 isn't quite as popular as the N. Sane trilogy, but I thought it did a perfect job at continuing the Crash series, and I also really like the new abilities that they introduced. These are special platformers, and the fact that these are so unique all of these years later, I think that just kind of tells you how special they truly are. Number 2, Banjo-Kazooie. Every single time that I talk about Banjo-Kazooie, it's kind of bittersweet because it is a travesty that for whatever reason, we still don't have a true Banjo-Kazooie 3 with that original formula. Nuts and Bolts is a fine game, but it's not what we wanted. This is just one of the biggest crimes in all of gaming. I have no idea why Xbox hasn't made this happen because Banjo 1 and 2 are amazing. These are the 2 platformers that I've gone back to the most in my life and played because I just love everything about these games. The characters, the sense of humor, the colorful, memorable worlds, the music by Grant Kirkhope is amazing. I like the mini games, as well as all of the different creatures that you transform into. That's one of the great things about this game. It constantly throws new, fresh ideas your way. It never feels stale. And while we still don't have true remakes or Banjo-Kazooie 3, I mean, come on, Xbox, please. Do something here. Anything. Come on, let's make this happen. But what I can say here is that you can play Banjo 1 and Banjo 2 HD on Xbox, and I think all of these years later, they do still hold up incredibly well. And at the number 1 spot, I'm actually going to go with Psychonauts 1 and Psychonauts 2. And the reason for that is because they combine everything that I love about other platformers, and they turn it into this absolute masterpiece. It's got a really good, fun story that's also kind of deep at the same time, which is rare for this genre. You play as Rasputin, who goes to this camp to become a psychonaut, and you meet all these charming, albeit very quirky characters. I think that's actually one of the things that makes it so memorable, but you learn how to infiltrate people's minds, and this makes for some of the most creative levels that I've seen in gaming, period. I mean, at one point, you enter a fish's brain. Yes, a fish's brain, and you see how it thinks, and it's just hilarious. Then there's the Milkman. You know the Milkman? I know the Milkman. And I mean, it just has so many memorable moments like this. You also unlock a lot of abilities throughout the game that kind of keeps it fresh as well. And by the time you reach Psychonauts 2, they just dial everything up to 10. They make its world bigger. They get more creative. And I'm telling you, they put together one of the most imaginative experiences in all of gaming, and that's why it sits at my #1 spot. Again, and I do have to emphasize this as well, it also has a strong and actually meaningful story to tell, and yeah, I mean, I just think the gameplay is perfectly executed. I just hope that we don't have to wait another few decades before we get Psychonauts 3. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this list. I know it's been a long one, but hopefully you enjoyed it. And as always, let me know about your favorites in the comments below. But until next time, subscribe and peace out.